Welcome to Asia Gaming Group's face-to-face series. Today I'm speaking with David Green. He's the principal of New Page Consulting and one of the architects of Macau's gaming law. We're going to talk to him about the tumultuous developments in the last few weeks in Macau regarding the junket sector and VIP gaming. David, thank you for joining us today. It's very great to have you on. It's been a pretty tumultuous week for Macau. Last week we had the ruling with Wynn Resorts and Dore, the court ruling. This week we've had the news of the arrest of Alvin Chow and the closure of the Suncity VIP rooms. Which has the biggest impact? Let's just start from there.
I think the most long-lasting impact will be the matter relating to Suncity and Alvin Chow, because it really does go to the heart of the traditional junket promotion model. And if this is a portent of what's to come, I think it augurs badly for that model and its longevity in the market.
Have you any ideas on timing? I mean, why do you think they did this now? Because the junket model has been around for years. When they put out their statement describing what Mr. Chow had allegedly done, it basically described a junket business model.
That's true, but there have been a number of things that have, I guess, changed on the landscape going back as far as 2014, when the first crackdown was announced and implemented to ensure that capital controls were being observed appropriately. This is not new from Suncity's point of view. Back in 2019, there was actually quite a bit of publicity around their operations in the Philippines and their proxy betting China-facing business. So this has been some years in the making, and I think what we're seeing now is just a culmination of quite a long build-up to this situation.
Do you think there's a future at all for junkets in Macau specifically?
Well, there may be a future for junkets which are not China-facing. But, of course, the history of the traditional junkets in Macau has been that they are risk intermediators. They've taken the credit risk and the collection risk. Now, that risk may not be present if there are other groups of players apart from mainland Chinese that are being targeted. That would depend on the law of the source countries as to whether, in fact, credit is allowed, firstly, for gaming, and secondly, if it is, whether the debts are enforceable legally. But I wouldn't preclude the possibility of junkets from countries such as Malaysia, Thailand, even Indonesia, where there are substantial populations of gamblers, and they may be willing and able to look further afield than perhaps they've done up to date.
That's probably not a short-term thing though, right? Given what we were talking about.
Well, no, because if you look at the junkets, in reality, they don't own the players. The players are sourced by their agents. And the network of agents is really very extensive. Would be probably in the tens of thousands for the junkets that are licensed in Macau. So to replicate that sort of network in a new jurisdiction will be very difficult. Whether they need to do it, I guess, is another question. But if you follow that logic of the traditional organisation, then you certainly wouldn't go ahead without a fairly substantial network of agents.
And in terms of the premium mass business, do you see that being hit at all by this ruling?
I think there'll be some impact on it. Obviously, it's not a junket-driven model, but the players themselves will be, I think, sensitive to the fact that no one's immune from action if the government in the PRC feels that it's appropriate. And it's a similar sentiment to what happened with premium direct play some years ago when China first started its crackdown in 2014. There was a notable withdrawal from the market of those players, and that was quite a protracted withdrawal. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the premium mass business take a bit of a hit, even where it really is a cash-driven business, where what they're providing the players is loss rebates or own play commissions. There will still be some sensitivity about disclosure of their play, the reporting obligations under AML being observed pretty strictly. And I don't think anyone will want to put their heads too far above the parapet just in case it's not safe.
Yeah, it's very, very major question mark over quite what China's going to allow to do in terms of allowing people to come to Macau to gamble, isn't it?
I think so. I think the interpretation that China appears to have applied in the case of Suncity is disturbing, because what it really suggests is that the criminal law of China treats the border between the mainland and Macau as an international border. That kind of flies in the face of the one country, two systems approach. But to the extent that they're treating it as extraterritorial, if they apply that interpretation consistently, anyone who organises travel for players, whether they're junkets or not, is potentially at risk of infringing the criminal law.
It was a very worrying development for sure. I'm going to go back just a little bit to the prior week where we had the court ruling, the High Court ruling that basically said that Wynn and Dore were jointly responsible for a junket debt, for a VIP player's debt. What does that mean for the operators should they decide to carry on with their relations with the junkets?
In fact, the regulation which governs licensing of junkets, Regulation 6 of 2002, which I believe will be amended, but at this stage hasn't been, really provides the underpinning for this judgment. What it says is that there is joint liability between an operator and a licensed junket, where the junket is operating on the premises of the casino concessionaire and commits a breach of the law. Now, in this case, it was really a defalcation apparently by an employee who stole money from the junket. Third parties were damaged because it was their funds, not the junket's own money in the sense that it physically owned it. And so therefore the third party protections have been extended in this case. I might say, though, that as someone who was very closely involved in putting Regulation 6 together, it probably wasn't something that was ever contemplated as being within scope. What was contemplated were things like loan sharking or cheating of customers. And in that case, it was felt a reasonable control was to make both the operator and the junket operator jointly liable.
So at this point, do you think it's worth it for the operators to maintain their junket relationships?
Well, there are two aspects to that. After Suncity, it's debatable whether the junket model can survive anyway. But the second thing is that there's something of a mistake being made, I think, by both commentators and also potentially by operators about the licensing system for junkets in Macau. It's not a one-stop shop. Once somebody's licensed, it's not a guarantee or surety that they're suitable or appropriate for engagement by the casinos. That's a separate step. And unfortunately for the casino operators, they can't avoid doing their own due diligence to satisfy themselves that if there is a risk, at least they know what it is and they can potentially take steps to mitigate it. So I think what you'll find is that if there are junkets which are still viable post Suncity, who wish to be engaged by the the casino concessionaires. The casino concessionaires themselves will apply a much more stringent analysis and due diligence process than perhaps they've done up to date.
Is it worth it, given that it's a shrinking portion of the market?
Well, it could be worth it if you can get volume, but one of the problems with a shrinking market for VIP is going to be volatility, because the less players you have coming through as VIPs, inherently the volatility is going to increase, because one or two players can make a far bigger impact on the market if there's only a relative handful who are entering it, compared to the good old days when there were literally hundreds of high-rolling players. So I'm not sure that it is worth it, and certainly if it's going to involve the sort of outlays that were required to get the players there in the first place, and potentially to take an enhanced credit risk, because you may not want the junkets managing all of the credit risk due to Dore and also concerns about how they might enforce collection. It becomes very marginal, I think.
Yeah, I think this sort of consensus is building around the fact that in Macau, at least, there's not really a future. In the upcoming, amendments to the law that have been proposed, what do you see in there as regard to junkets?
So I think there will be those additional requirements. I think one thing the government should consider is possibly changing the regulation to allow the shareholders of the licensed junket to include companies. Because at the moment, the ownership of shares in the licensed junkets is restricted to individuals. And this is one reason why they can't list on a stock exchange. Suncity, the company that's listed in Hong Kong, is not the licensed junket operator. And there seems to be a common misconception that the junkets are licensed. They aren't, because they can't be. But it would make, in my view anyway, good sense for the government, if they want to see junkets continue, to allow them to have direct access to capital markets and to be investable, because being investable brings its own requirements for transparency and good governance.
Thank you for joining me on Asia Gaming Brief's Face-to-Face series. Join us every Friday for our interviews with thought leaders in Asia's gaming industry.